I'm Marguerite Monroe, part of the team at the Ruth Chandler Williamson Gallery at Scripps College. It's a pleasure for me to introduce Meher McArthur, our speaker for this evening. She's an Asian art curator, author, and educator. She worked for 9 years as curator of East Asian art at Pacific Asia Museum, now part of the University of Southern California, where she curated over 15 exhibitions. She's the former creative director for the Stoyer Stern's Japanese Garden in Pasadena and the former Gabrielle Jungels-Winkler curator of academic programs and collections at Scripps College. She has curated several exhibitions for Southern California galleries and for the traveling exhibition company International Arts and Artists, including the exhibitions Folding Paper, The Infinite Possibilities of Origami, Above the Fold, New Expressions in Origami, and Nature, Tradition, and Innovation, Contemporary Japanese Ceramics from the collection of Gordon Broad-Fuhrer. She's currently Art and Cultural Director for Japan House Los Angeles. She writes regularly about Asian art and Southern California artists for KCET Artbound, Buddhist art and artists for BuddhistStore.net, and occasionally for Artillery Magazine and Orientations Magazine. Her major publications include Gods and Goblins, Folk Paintings from Otsu, Reading Buddhist Art, an Illustrated Guide to Buddhist Signs and Symbols, and The Arts of Asia, Materials, Techniques, and Styles. Before leaving Scripps, Meher curated the 4 Seasons in Japanese Art for the Williamson Gallery, which is the subject of tonight's lecture. Unfortunately, the gallery remains closed, but you can see the Scripps College collection in another exhibition Meher curated for Japan House LA, Nature, Supernature, Visions of This World and Beyond in Japanese woodblock prints. That will be on view through the rest of May. Meher certainly knows how to stay busy, and now I will turn the program over to Meher.
Hi there, and thank you so much, Marguerite, for your lovely introduction. It's so nice to be here, and thank you to everybody at Scripps who's made this event possible this evening, especially to Mary McNaughton and the team at the Williamson Gallery, and I'm hoping to stay connected with you all for many more years to come. I'd also like to thank the Clark Lectureship Fund for making this event possible. Now, today's talk is about the exhibition Shiki, the 4 Seasons in Japanese Art, which, as Marguerite said, is currently in the Williamson Gallery, though not open to the public yet. But you can check the website, the Williamson Gallery website, and get all sorts of great information about the exhibition there, plus a video that we created a few months ago that takes you through the exhibition, so you can pretend you're in there. Now, the exhibition was originally pre-pandemic scheduled to open in fall of 2020. So it would have been a fall opening for 4 Seasons exhibition, but because of the pandemic, we postponed it to January. So that would have made it a winter opening. We are now we were hoping for maybe spring. And now that we're sort of passing through spring, we can still keep our fingers crossed that there might be a summer opening. Luckily, with an exhibition called The 4 Seasons, you can open it any time of the year and the date still makes sense. Now, I've spent many years studying the art and culture of Japan, and one thing that's been consistently apparent over the years is that the Japanese have a very close and a very intense relationship with nature. Oh, I'm going to start my screen share now. Sorry about that. This was supposed to be the first slide. There's a lovely kimono in the collection that has flowers and plants of the 4 seasons. Now, the Japanese, as I said, have had a very intense relationship with nature. They've long believed, revered the power of nature, and nature has been a very important part of its spiritual traditions. The Japanese, for a very long time, have worshipped the various deities that they believe to inhabit various aspects of nature. They've also admired its many beauties, and Japan is a very beautiful country. It has a lot to admire. The Japanese have also been extremely conscious and sensitive to the cycle of the 4 seasons, known in Japanese as Shiki, 4 seasons. Now, for almost 1,500 years, nature and the 4 seasons have been central themes in Japanese poetry and art. And over the centuries, a rich literary and visual vocabulary of the 4 seasons has evolved with plants, animals, flowers, and weather conditions becoming code for the different seasons and the various moods and activities related to them. What we see here are 4 images representing 4 seasons in Japan. I took some of these photographs myself. One is spring, the cherry blossoms. Another is the irises representing early summertime, which is around about now in traditional Japanese culture. The third is an image of maple leaves in the autumn. And the fourth image, which I'm sad to say I didn't take myself, is a snow monkey in northern Japan representing the season of wintertime. A nice image to gaze at now when it's a little bit warmer than is comfortable. Now, seasonal references, over the centuries, seasonal references have appeared in all aspects of art, in paintings, ceramics, woodblock prints, kimonos, lacquerwares, cloisonné enamels. And in all of these art forms, there are a number of motifs, other flowers or birds or seasonal weather conditions that represent the seasons, and they connect the owner of the object with the particular season. Typically, they would be brought out and displayed during the season that is represented in the motif. Now, what we're looking at here, 4 examples from the Scripps collection that are all on view in the 4 Seasons exhibition. The top left, you're looking at a cloisonné enamel vase that features wisteria blossom. In the top center, we see a wild chrysanthemum or pink that represents summertime. On the right is a kimono, a beautiful silk kimono that has autumn leaves representing the autumn. And at the bottom, you see a scene, a woodblock printed triptych that clearly depicts wintertime, a scene that is a parody of a chapter in the tale of Genji, which is Japan's most famous classical novel that depicts the romance between Genji and many women, but one in particular, Murasaki, Lady Murasaki, and there you can see them on the left, and they're enjoying a snow scene of women playing in the snow and building a giant bunny rabbit out of snow, which is not necessarily a Japanese tradition. We don't sadly have a tradition of building snow bunnies. Now, the exhibition in the Williamson Gallery features about 60, 70 objects from the Scripps collection that are decorated with motifs relating to the seasons, and we'll be going through those today. But before I introduce the artworks, I think it's very important to note that this sort of almost a cultural obsession with the 4 seasons is deeply rooted in the tradition of Waka poetry. The word Waka means Japanese poem or Japanese song. You can see the characters for it at the top of the screen here. And Waka are basically, they're a poetic form that developed in Japan around the 7th century AD within the context of the imperial court in Kyoto. And Waka poems, there are many different forms of Waka poetry, but the most enduring form is the tanka, which is a short form of poetry. And the tanka over the centuries has evolved into the haiku, which is much more well-known internationally. But the tanka form of Waka poetry has a total of 31 syllables arranged in 5 lines, 5, 7, 5, 7, 7. And so what we're looking at on the screen right now is an example of a tanka form of Waka poetry. And these Waka poems are very important when it comes to talking about the 4 seasons and how they have impacted and influenced Japanese art and culture, because it was within the context of these poems that various associations between natural motifs and seasonal motifs became associated with certain seasons and certain emotions and activities. There are many hundreds of words, seasonal words called kigo, that when they're used in a poem, they evoke everything about that season. The temperature, the weather, the mood, the various emotions associated with the season. So one word, for example, would be sakura, meaning cherry blossom. Once that's in your Waka poem, everybody reading the poem knows we're talking about spring. We're probably talking about something slightly sad, the idea that beauty and life is fleeting and will disappear after it has has blossomed to its full. There are also seasonal themes like playing in the snow or fanning yourself to stay cool in the summertime. These are called kidai, and they also evoke a particular mood, a season and a mood in the poetry. The song of the cuckoo evokes summertime and longing, but the longing that's associated with the summertime. Another important thing to note in Waka poetry is that there are a lot of puns, there's a lot of wordplay in Waka poetry where a particular word that has many different meanings in Japanese. Japanese is a language that's rich in homonyms, so words that sound the same but have different meanings. They're used a lot in Waka poetry to basically present multiple meanings. So you have for example, the word matsu can mean pine, but it can also mean the verb to wait for something. So that if it's used in a poem, the poem could be referring to a pine tree, but it could also be referring to the waiting or pining for somebody. So it's very similar to wordplay in English, but it's a very important part of this classical form of poetry in Japan. And it's very closely related to a lot of not just the poetry that's evolved over the many centuries in Japanese history, but also in a lot of the art. So here we have a Waka poem. I'm just going to read the English version here. Oh, cherry blossoms who have just this year begun to understand spring, would that you never learn what it means to scatter. And although the English version doesn't have the beautiful 57577 syllable count, you get the mood, you understand the mood of a sense of admiration for the beauty of the cherry blossoms, and also the sense of sadness that after they've bloomed fully, they will disappear and scatter. So it's a sort of prayer to the cherry blossoms to not learn how to scatter. And this was written, this seems very modern perhaps to people in the West today, but this was a very early poem written by Kino Tsurayuki, who's one of the most famous poets in the first millennium. So this poem's been around for over 1,000 years in Japan, and the idea of sadness at the scattering of the beautiful cherry blossoms. Now, this is the first of the first image in the actual exhibition. As you enter the gallery, it's on the left. I haven't actually been into the gallery since it was installed, but I know where this image is. And it's a woodblock printed image by an artist called Toyota Hokke, and it dates to the 19th century. And it's an image that really kind of starts the seasonal cycle for the exhibition. It is a view from inside a room, a traditional Japanese room, and you're looking out the window, and outside the window you see a flowering plum tree, and on it you see a little bird. People who are familiar with imagery and symbolism, well-educated people over the centuries in Japan would know right away that they're looking at a plum blossom, a flowering plum branch with a bush warbler perched on it, because a bush warbler has long been associated with plum blossoms. These are two motifs that are associated with early spring. According to poetic convention, the sound of the bush warbler crying outside is basically heralds in the spring after a long cold winter. And the flowering of the plum tree represents this sort of emergence, the resilience, the endurance that all living things have gone through to survive the winter. And the plum blossom is flowering gloriously at the beginning of spring. So this motif is very much an early spring motif. And motifs like this that are paired are very common in various different art forms. Here we see it in a print, but we'll see some in paintings and kimonos and other artworks as well. Now, this is an image that should evoke spring here in California as well. I think we've probably just reached the end of the wisteria season, although there's always wisteria blooming on the Scripps campus in our minds. It's one of the great moments at Scripps. Wisteria is a plant that typically blooms in late April, early May in Japan. And the flowers they symbolize love and longing and endurance, probably because the vines cling to other structures that you can see here in this beautiful print that dates to the late 19th century. The vine is almost reaching over to cling not just to the veranda that the lady is standing on, but almost to embrace her. She's dressed in this beautiful kimono that is dyed with this gorgeous purple hue that also evokes the color of the wisteria. And she looks very wistful, as if she's contemplating, she's longing for someone or somewhere or something. So the theme of the wisteria it's a spring theme, but it also is loaded with emotion, ideas of longing. Now we see this wisteria motif in many different aspects of Japanese art. Here's a beautiful kimono that dates to the mid 20th century. It's not old, but it's beautiful nonetheless. And you see wisteria vines all over the surface of the kimono. This is clearly a kimono that would be worn in the springtime to coincide with the blooming of the wisteria blossoms. And over on the right here, you can see a little box called an inro, which was a container for medicines, and other objects that people would carry around with them, usually men actually, suspended from the sash, the obi that is tied around the kimono. And you can see that it's wood, and it's coated with lacquer, black lacquer and gold, a decoration of wisteria created with gold powder, sprinkled gold powder. So the wisteria is a motif that is found in many different types of Japanese art. Now, the crowning moment of spring is when the cherry blossoms bloom. And when they're in full bloom, the whole country goes completely crazy. I was actually lucky enough a few years ago to be in Kyoto right at Mankai, which means the fullest blooming of the cherry blossoms. And it was like a festival. Just out in the streets, everybody was just excited that the cherry blossoms were blooming fully. It was like nature was putting on a firework display, but a very, very pale pink firework display. And people go out in hordes normally, not this spring, not last spring, but typically the Japanese celebrate the blooming of the cherries in a very big way. It's one of the two. It's a national. It's an event. There are not just weather forecasts in the spring on Japanese TV, but there are cherry blossom blooming forecasts. So you can see where the cherry blossoms are at the best in any part of Japan on any day during the spring. So if you need to go see cherry blossoms tomorrow, you know where to go. So this is a print, a triptych print, so a 3-page print that was created in the 1850s by Hiroshige, who's one of Japan's favorite woodblock print artists. He's one of the artists known for making landscape prints, a very popular genre in woodblock printing in ukiyo-e. And this is a parade of beautiful women heading out to picnic under the cherry blossoms. And of course, Mount Fuji is in the background here. This is one of my favorite images in the exhibition. It's wonderful when you can you can look closely at all the different figures and all the expressions of the beautiful ladies as they head towards the cherry blossoms. And here's another lovely woodblock print that was designed by an artist called Chikanobu, and the Scripps College collection has many wonderful works by Chikanobu. This is Princess Yuki from a myth, a famous myth, and she was the daughter of a magician, and she had learned some magic herself, and she was apparently cruelly kidnapped and tied to a cherry tree, and somehow she used her magic to turn, and she used her feet also to draw the form of a mouse in the cherry blossom, the cherry petals that were sprinkled at her feet. And she transformed that picture of a mouse into a real mouse, who then multiplied into many mice, who then gnawed on the ropes that bound her to the tree and set her free. I love this print. It's just such an amazing and very unusual depiction of cherry blossoms and their special power. And this dates to the late 19th century. One of my favorite prints in the exhibition. And here we have a really stunning cloisonné enamel vase depicting flowering cherry trees and willow branches as well. These are two plants associated with later in the springtime. And this is one of the many lovely cloisonné enamel pieces in the Scripps collection. It dates to the late 19th, early 20th century, and is by an artist called Ando Jube, who's one of the most important cloisonné enamel artists who was active 100 or so years ago. Now, spring is really probably the favorite season in Japan, and autumn is pretty close. I actually personally prefer autumn, but summer is not most people's favorite season in Japan. It's a very hot, very humid time of the year, and it's not a time when people have typically spent a lot of days and hours outdoors, except maybe hiking in the mountains where they can get cool, or by the water. So because it's not a popular time to be outside, it's not a season that has been written about much in poetry, and it's depicted the least in art. In art, you see a lot of cherry blossoms and wisteria representing spring. You also see a lot of maples and chrysanthemums representing autumn, lots of snowy scenes representing winter, but very few images representing summer, because it's not really everybody's favorite month. So where you do see images, and I'll be sharing some of them, they depict motifs relating to the summertime, but they often, when they depict people, they often depict women fanning themselves to stay cool, or standing by the waterside to try and catch a refreshing breeze. I'm sharing this little haiku poem, much later poem by a modern poet, Kobayashi Issa. And it's very short and sweet, so I'll read it quickly. Refreshing breeze with all his strength, the cricket. It really sums up the sounds and the feeling, the mood, the atmosphere of the summertime, where even the cricket is trying to stay cool. This is an image from the Scripps collection that depicts women by a riverside trying to stay cool on a summer's evening. It's by the artist Shikanobu. And it is, here you see them, you can see it there, it's summertime because they're wearing their kimonos slightly loosely around their necks. They're also holding fans, and they're fanning themselves to stay cool. It's, I'm sorry, this is by Utagawa Kunisada III, and it dates to 1893. This is a print by Hiroshige, which I think is quite lovely. It depicts a cuckoo flying over a temple in Edo. It dates to the 1850s. And just the presence of the cuckoo tells you that this is summertime. That's all you need. You don't need any other plants and flowers here to know that you're looking at an image that represents summertime, because the cuckoo is a bird that is believed to appear in the summertime, and its presence tells you that the next few months are going to be hot and sticky. So here you see the cuckoo flying over a temple. It not only represents summertime, but the cry of the cuckoo in poetry has been long associated with longing for a loved one or a hometown. And so a well-educated Japanese person over the centuries would see an image of a cuckoo, and that would, conjure up the sense of a hot, sticky summer, but also a sense of longing, that somebody is longing for a loved one. And there are a number of flowers that are associated with the summertime. One of them is the iris, which is associated with the 5th month typically. And actually on Boys' Day, which was yesterday, Children's Day, the iris is a really important flower that is used to celebrate that festival. It's the 5th day of the 5th month. The irises are not only associated with springtime and Boys' Day and manhood, partly because of the shape of their leaves. They look like swords. But they're also associated with nostalgia for a hometown. There's a poem written in the 8th century by a banished nobleman who who saw irises and they reminded him of his home. My cat's obviously very excited by irises as well. I'm sorry for the meowing. Um, Here are some irises on a pair of cloisonné enamel vases in the collection, which are stunning. And normally in imagery, the irises are purple on a white ground, but I love the way that the artists have created these irises in white and a sort of grayish purple on a black ground, so that you almost, when you look at them, you feel like you're looking at irises at nighttime, maybe lit up by the moonlight. They're so elegant and exquisite. They're really also really tiny. They're only a few inches high. But when you blow them up to this size on a screen, you really get a sense of the detail and the amazing craftsmanship that went into creating them. Another flower that's associated with the summertime is the peony. And this is a flower that is really more native to China. And it has many cultural associations in China, but Japan has adopted a lot of these. And in Japan too, the peony is associated with feminine beauty. And because of its full, very gorgeous petals. And what you see here is a woodblock print that has been created in the shape of a fan, a flat fan of the type that the women were holding in the image I showed you a couple of images back. This was originally made to be cut out and mounted on a fan, so that you can imagine a beautiful woman in the 19th century keeping cool in the summertime with a fan with peonies on it, representing summertime and feminine beauty. So this is sort of the ideal fan to be using to cool yourself in the summertime. This is a gorgeous print by, let's see, Utagawa Sadatora. So dates to 1830. He's a member of the Utagawa school, who mostly are known for kabuki actor prints, but this is a particularly gorgeous fan print that would have been, it was never actually made into a fan, but we're lucky to see it, because if it had been made into a fan, it may not have survived. Here we see peonies with lions on a beautiful Arita porcelain dish from the 19th century. And just as peonies are seen to be the sort of queen of all flowers, or the king of the flowers, lions are the king of the animal kingdom. And so often in Chinese art, and they are paired as the royalty of of flora and fauna. And this motif and the juxtaposition of the two motifs was transmitted to Japan as well. But lions aren't particularly associated with summertime, but here you see the symbolism of sort of royalty and luxury on this dish. Now, another flower that's associated with summertime is the wild carnation, or nadeshiko, or pink. And here you see a little print by Hiroshige of nadeshiko with butterflies, which I think is really exquisite. It's very simple and very exquisite, and it's made in the form of a traditional poetry card. It has a poem accompanying it. It's a very elegant little woodblock print. And on the right here is a porcelain bowl, a kakemon style bowl that features these pinks as well, the summer wild carnations. This is one of the treasures of the Japanese ceramics collection at Scripps. And finally, we have a kimono that is decorated with these wild pinks shown with swirling water. And this is a summer kimono, even though it's black, it's made out of this very thin gauze-like fabric that would help keep you cool in the summertime. And the motif with the water, the swirling water, was also supposed to help keep you cool. This is a really lovely, fairly modern kimono made in the last 25 years or so. And the last summer image here is an image of a sudden downpour on Ohashi Bridge in Edo by the very well-known and beloved ukiyo-e artist Hiroshige. This is one of his most famous print designs, and it was collected and copied in Europe by Vincent van Gogh. He copied this print in oils. Hiroshige's original was designed in 1857, and Van Gogh made his version of it in 1887, so only 30 years later. Van Gogh was a big fan of Japanese prints. They really informed his artistic style and vision for their light and the composition and treatment of color. So this is, if any of you have been in Japan in June and July, you might have experienced one of these downpours. Hiroshige had a way of creating a sense of rain lashing down on the people and the nature below. Now, as I said, one of the more beloved seasons of the year is autumn. And there are many motifs that are related to autumn, including the full moon, the autumn moon. It's a very important motif, not just in Japanese art and culture, but throughout East Asia. What we see here is a poem by Otagaki Rengetsu, who was a Buddhist nun who was also an artist in the 19th century and a poet and a calligrapher. She made ceramics and she decorated her ceramics with her poetry and her own calligraphy. This is a poem that she wrote about the autumn moon. Across the fields and hills, my spirits buoyed with joy, I return to my bedroom accompanied by tonight's autumn moon. I love this poem. I love most of her poetry. But it gives you the sense that many poets have written about they're often lonely people, but they are not lonely when they have the autumn moon with them as their companion. You see images, if you see a print or a painting of a full moon in Japan, it's typically the autumn moon that you're looking at. Here we see a woodblock print on the left depicting a character from the tale of Genji who is looking up at the autumn moon. Wild geese are flying past the full moon, and both the autumn moon and wild geese are symbols of the autumn, and they have a sort of melancholy, a sort of sadness to them, the passing of the year, the heading towards the cold wintertime again. On the right is an image of from the 1700s by a Kyoto artist, Sukenobu, showing a beautiful young lady looking up at the autumn moon. And you can see maple leaves down below the moon. So you know you're looking at autumn. The moon is also combined with a number of grasses and plants that are associated with the autumn. Bush clover is one of the plants. Suzuki, which is this wild, fluffy wild grass that you see a lot in the Japanese countryside in the autumn. You can see it in this, the print at the right. A no actor here in this no theater print is performing a scene that involves these Suzuki grasses. So you know that the scene is set in the autumn. There are various insects also associated with autumn. I haven't talked about bugs much, but the dragonfly is an insect that's associated with the autumn. And here you see a dragonfly and bush clover on a beautiful hair ornament, a comb. Here you see bush clover, maple leaves, and the full moon hinted at here over a river. One of the most popular plants in the autumn is the chrysanthemum, which is, it's a plant that originally was introduced to Japan from China, and it has many associations in Japan, including with the imperial family. It's the flower that's on the Japanese passport, it's on Japanese money. It's a very important, it's sort of the national flower of Japan. It represents the country, although the cherry blossom kind of represents the sort of sentiment of the Japanese people. The chrysanthemum represents the nation of Japan, but it also represents autumn. And this is a gorgeous print by Ohara Shoson. So it dates to 1926, so relatively late, showing chrysanthemums over a river, a very cool looking river. I really love this depiction of chrysanthemums. Chrysanthemums appear in many other media. You see on this obi here, which is the sash that is that ties the kimono together. Many obi feature chrysanthemums. This is a time of year when many events are held. People go out, they go to weddings, they go to moon viewings, and often dress up. So there are many obi that have autumn motifs on them. There are a number of hair ornaments in the Scripps collection that feature chrysanthemums as well, such as this 1930s or 40s comb that is one of those stunning hair ornaments in the collection. Actually made of plastic, which today doesn't sound like it's very special, but in the 30s it was pretty special, luxurious material back then, but made to look like lacquer, which is kind of an interesting cultural twist. And down below we have two cloisonné vases that are decorated with chrysanthemums as well for the autumn. Now, probably the plant associated most with autumn in Japan is the maple leaf, the red maple leaves. If you are lucky enough to visit Japan in the autumn, you will just be stunned at the redness of the maples. And often their maple trees are planted close to ginkgo trees, which turn this rich yellow. And then you look up and the sky is this deep, deep blue, and the colors are just, and then there's a pine tree, so there's green as well. And I've often just been blown away at the richness of the colors in autumn. That's Japan's most colorful season. In this beautiful painting that Scripps recently acquired, you see a scene that is very definitely set in the autumn. There's the moon here, and you have the maple leaves, and you also have these grasses, the Suzuki grasses that suggest autumn. Here you see Genji visiting one of his many lovers in this rustic old hut. And I love in this painting that so many of the details are made to match the red of the maple leaves. Like the outfit that the horse is wearing is in the same color as the maple leaves, and some of the layers of this beautiful lady's kimono, and I think this is her table behind her, are also in that color as well. And of course, the red of the artist's chop. Stamp or seal is also, it coordinates beautifully with the maples. Oops, sorry. I seem to have I'm trying to, there we go. I apologize, there we are. A couple more objects decorated with maple leaves, a comb and a hairpin from the collection, and a kimono that features maple leaves floating in the Tatsuta River, which is in Kyoto, a very popular scene for viewing maple leaves. Now, the last season of the year is wintertime. And winter is a sad, cold, lonely season in reality often, but also in poetry and also in various scenes depicted in art. However, it's also a beautiful season. It's a very popular season in art because artists love to play with white and create interesting effects using the color of the paper that is below that. So for example, here, the artist Hiroshige has not painted this scene white. He has printed around, printed very cleverly to make the white of the paper kind of come to the foreground and appear to be covering the various elements of the composition. White is winter is one of the most artistic, photogenic seasons of the year. And so for artists, it was a wonderful opportunity to experiment with with color and lack of color. This is a poem. This is actually by Basho. It's a haiku poem by Basho, who is the most famous poet of Japan's poets from the Edo period. And it reads, "Winter solitude in a world of one color, the sound of wind." And what I love about this poem is that he switches right away from something that you see, the world that has no color in it, to the sound. So there's no color to focus on, so you hear the sound more clearly. And I love the way that he suddenly kind of tricks you into switching from one sense to another with this particular poem. Now, there are many woodblock prints depicting people playing in the snow, walking in the snow, crying in the snow, fleeing from the enemy in the snow. And this is one of the loveliest images in the exhibition and in the print collection, showing two young ladies strolling in dressed. These are young ladies from the pleasure quarters. And this dates to the very late 18th century. And these two young ladies are strolling through the snow, um, and they seem to be huddled together under the umbrella. They look fairly warm because they're wearing many layers of silk kimono that are probably keeping them warm. But I always look at their feet and I worry about them getting frostbite because they have no socks on, and their feet are exposed to the elements. But as with women, and often in many parts of the world, many cultures, women don't always wear the most comfortable clothes to look their loveliest. So this was the case in Edo period Japan as well. And this is particularly lovely. This print may have been more colorful when it was originally printed, but I love the way that the colors have become these very gentle earth tones, and the palette has become very subtle against the white background of the snow. And here's a much more colorful image that was designed by two artists working together. Hiroshige, who did the central panel of the triptych. He was the landscape print designer, so he created the landscape part, and then Kunisada, who created the two outer parts of the triptych that contain the people. And here you see Genji and Murasaki watching these ladies building a snow bunny. And this is a sort of modern 19th century version of this 11th century novel, a scene from this 11th century novel. So it's a sort of parody. And one of the details I love most about it is that this young lady is using a sake cup. She's placing a sake cup on the rabbit's head to create its eye. It's a very playful detail here. And the garden is particularly lovely. All the different details covered in snow, very soft, very quiet scene. And last few images of wintertime feature motifs associated with winter. Snow is obviously a very important motif that conjures up the sense of wintertime, the coldness, the quiet of winter. But there are a number of birds and flowers that are associated with winter, like the crane, and also sparrows. Sparrows are often paired with bamboo, and here you see them paired with bamboo that's covered in snow. So a very lovely wintry scene. You also have camellias. Camellias are a flower that have long been associated with wintertime in Japan. This is a detail of the camellias here, so you can see more closely how the artists, we don't know who painted this screen, but the artist coated the camellia with this white pigment that's made of ground up seashells. It's called gofun, but it gives it a lovely, you almost feel the texture of the snow on the flower in the painting. Now, as well as bamboo, there are two other plants that are very closely associated with the wintertime, and bamboo is associated with the wintertime because it's one of the plants that stays green throughout the year, but it's also very flexible and it bends in the wind without breaking. So it's associated with resilience and integrity. Its companion plants are the pine tree, which is an evergreen. It stays green throughout the winter, so it's associated with long life and endurance. And then the plum tree, which is a tree that blooms in the wintertime, and is therefore associated with resilience and fortitude. And together, these three plants, they're often depicted together, as in this kimono, you see the pine, the bamboo, and the plum here. And they're depicted as the three friends of wintertime, which is actually a Chinese motif that has been very popular in Japan for many centuries. In Japan, it's called shochikubai, which means pine, bamboo, plum. And here you see plum blossoms on a beautiful cloisonné vase that would have been displayed in the wintertime. And now I'm going to end on this rather unusual and not very Japanese looking image of ladies and gentlemen in the wintertime. This was created in the late 19th century during the Meiji period in Japan, when Japan was rapidly westernizing and modernizing. And many Japanese people, upper class people in particular, started to dress in European clothing, often Victorian outfits, and for women, and military uniforms, what European, often Prussian military uniforms for men. And even the children were given European style clothing to wear. And this is an interesting scene of very upper class courtier types in the wintertime, created by Chikanobu, designed by Chikanobu, who was very popular as an artist during this period for depicting Japan's modernization. He also went on to create a lot of scenes that look back nostalgically at much more traditional Japanese culture. And a lot of his images, we've seen a few of them, depict women in kimonos. But here in this particular scene, you see a group of very westernized Japanese people standing in a very Western building, outside a Western building. But there are some very traditional motifs here. And on the right here, you can see some plum blooming, so pinkish, reddish plum blossoms blooming here, and a whole big plum tree at the left. And over flying through the sky here are a bird that you should recognize as the bush warbler. And so this brings us full circle. We started with a view from inside a traditional Japanese room out through a window to a sprig of a blooming plum branch with a bush warbler perched on it, that together herald the end of winter and the beginning of the arrival of spring. So that's what you're seeing here in this very modern looking image, with the figures are all trying to be very westernized, but you can see that the artist has added in these traditional motifs that are seasonal references that herald the coming of spring. So I am going to end it here, and thank you all for your attention. I hope I haven't talked too long, but I know that we're going to have some time for questions. So I will stop sharing. And now I see Marguerite back on the on the screen with me. Happy to take some questions if you have any. Thank you so much.
Meher, that was wonderful. Thank you so much for one of the most beautiful PowerPoint lectures I've ever seen. Such gorgeous symbols. I'll start off with the first question, but we definitely welcome questions from the audience. But I'm curious if you can share, you mentioned Tale of Genji, but if you can share other sources that helped establish the symbolism of the four seasons in Japanese culture and how that would have been disseminated more widely to the general population.
Right. Well, some of the earliest poetry collections were very important in sort of building the seasonal codes, the various symbols. So there were collections of poetry called the Kokinshu and the Kokin Wakashu, various collections of these Waka poems that date back to the 8th century, as early as the 8th century, and then later versions, the poetic anthologies dating to the 12th century that were very, very important in kind of solidifying the connection, all of these motifs, the seasonal words and the seasonal themes, that and the various emotions connected with them. So they were really, these various motifs and themes were really codified in these poems, in these poetry collections that were basically really enjoyed by the upper classes, the imperial court, and then gradually they started to be enjoyed by the military elite in the following centuries, and then they would create their version of poems, and not just Waka poems, but they would create a sort of connected verse, linked verse poetry, the military elite, and then later when a lot of the political and cultural power really started belonging to the ordinary people of the cities, they created their poetry, the haiku, and the poems that were part of their culture. And they kept those seasonal references that went back to the 7th century. So poetry really was one of the ways that these seasonal references were transmitted over the centuries. And they, these poems were a sign, that you were sophisticated. So if you knew your poetry, you were sophisticated. And then if you wanted to decorate your home with these references, you would have a folding screen that had an iris on it, and there would be this poetic reference through the image of the iris as well, and you'd be playing with these themes and these images and these words to show how sophisticated you were. And your visitors, if they could recognize them, that meant they were sophisticated too. So there was a lot of this cultural play going on, and the four seasons were really a big part of this.
It's so fascinating that poetry was so powerful and the means of conveying these symbols over the course of centuries. And then the general population kind of using the symbols for status and to show their cultured nature. Oh, we have a question from Kathy. What plants would you use if you did not want to depict a particular season?
Oh, interesting. Probably something foreign, something imported that doesn't really have a cultural association. It wasn't written about by poets hundreds of years ago. So I'm trying to think what, like well, orchids they're Chinese. The Chinese used orchids a lot. I'm trying to think of if you brought in a Western plant, what's a good bird of paradise flower? I mean, there are parts of Japan that are very tropical, so you could have bird of paradise flowers in an arrangement in Japan, and they wouldn't refer to a particular season necessarily. I'm be told off by an Ikebana person for getting that wrong. I'm sure it's probably associated with summertime, but it doesn't have a poetic association that goes back centuries. And you might be able to trying to think of flowers that are really popular here in California that you wouldn't necessarily see them in Japan. They're not coming to mind. I'm so sorry, but yeah, most of the flowers I'm thinking of have a seasonal reference. They have a seasonal association, so it's really hard to come up with something. You see a lot of cosmoses in Japan, but they, I think, are associated with summertime. Most flowers have been spoken for by the poets and the Ikebana flower arrangement people.
There's so many cultural associations. You have to go outside of the country to get flowers that don't hold meaning.
That's your best bet, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we have another comment just saying how much they love the presentation. So some comments about how beautiful the presentation was. And we have 3 minutes left if there are any final questions.
I wanted to apologize for the cats fighting in the background. Cat has no particular seasonal association in Japanese art, as far as I know. And so if you see a cat in a Japanese painting, you don't necessarily know which season you're looking at. So there should be another clue in the painting. If the cat's playing in the snow, obviously it's wintertime. Or if the cat is maybe tapping a wisteria blossom, trying to pull it down, it's the springtime. So you'd have to look for your clues, but there are usually clues in a painting, on a porcelain dish. There's usually some seasonal reference that tells you when you're supposed to use that dish or what time of the year it's most appropriate to bring it out and display it for your guests. All of this is also very closely linked. The seasons are closely observed during the tea ceremony. So if you're inviting a guest to a tea ceremony, you will hang a scroll in the decorative alcove, the tokonoma, that reflects the season, and you will cut a flower that is from the season. And there are actually hundreds of micro seasons in Japanese culture. That are like three to 5 days long. There's a real tradition of seasonality and getting it just right, that goes back over 1,000 years. So it's fascinating. It's an endless, but it's a really fascinating aspect of Japanese culture. And I'll just end on a funny story that when I was living in Japan, I remember there's friends and colleagues asking me, saying that Japan has wonderful 4 seasons, 4 very distinct seasons. Do you have 4 seasons in Europe? I bet you don't have 4 seasons like we do. And I would ask them, well, what's your favorite piece of classical music? And they'd say, well, 4 Seasons by Vivaldi. And we have 4 seasons too, but we're just not as excited about them as the Japanese are. I think this is a real sense of pride in Japan. Their 4 seasons are a really important part of their culture, and it's partly their connection with nature, but it's very much because of these poetic traditions that have really kind of crystallized the seasons as being a certain way, and having certain expectations and emotions attached to them. So it's poetry that has really created this strong sense of seasonality in Japan. It's fascinating.
Mm. We're recording this lecture, so we'll have to show it to poetry classes in the future. I think there would be a lot of benefit there. Thank you so much again, Meher. We're at time, but it was such a beautiful lecture. We have more comments saying how much people love the presentation. So thank you so much.
Lovely to be here, and I look forward to visiting Scripps campus sometime soon, I hope.
Yes, and being in the wisteria and the Margaret Fowler Garden together again someday.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you all so much for coming. Thank you. Take care.